I think when we sing this song, we sing God Turn It Around, but everybody in this room and everybody watching online, what you really need to know is that God will turn it around. I think what you need to know today is there's a promise. And the promise is God will turn it around. It may not look turned around the way you think turned around looks, but quite frankly, it'll be better than what you think turned around should look. We can't always see it. I don't know where you're at. I don't know what it is you're saying. God, I need you to turn around today, but I want to encourage you just to take a minute. Would you just close your eyes wherever you're at? I just want you to think of that thing. Everybody has a weight. It could be, man, there's a million things, marriages, relationships, sicknesses, bad diagnosis. It could be anything. I don't want you to think on that, and I want you to think about God turning it around. But what I want you to believe is the promise that God has for you, that God will turn it around. God will turn it around. And would everybody say, God will turn it around. Come on, say, God will turn it around. Now, all those doubts you've had this week, all those thoughts, all that negativity, all that pain, all the stuff you've endured, all of the things about how you're not good enough, all the things about how you'll never be good enough, all of the things that this is what it is, this is a family problem, every lie you've listened to. Now, I want you to lift your hands if you're comfortable, and I want you to say this as loud as you can in the face of darkness. Say, God will turn it around. God, we come to you right now. Holy Spirit, we need you. We know that we all need something that only you can turn around. But God, we don't come to you as a place to say we just need. We come to a place today to say, God, we worship you. Because we don't worship a God that we beckon and we bring all of our needs to. We worship a God that we know does things. He turns things around. He protects in ways that we cannot see. He helps us in ways that we can't understand. And in this moment, we surrender to you fully. We give you this darkness, this overwhelming place that seems like we can't get out of our own head. God, you are the King of all kings. And we declare in this moment that you're going to turn it around. We don't just say you can. God, we know God will turn it around. Because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And your word promises that you'll never leave us. Your word promises that you never fail. Your word promises that you go before us. Your word promises that you're a lamp just for us to see where we're walking, and a light just enough to know the path. And God, we stand here today and we declare God will turn it around. And we thank you for this, God. We surrender to this. We surrender to what we say because we know it's a surrendering in trust and faith to the God that we choose to obey in this moment. We love you. We thank you. And everybody said, amen. Can you give him a shout of praise like he's turned things around in your life? Come on, can you give him a shout? Do I got anybody in process today that needs a shout of praise that you know God is faithful? Come on, one more time so that all the world may know that he is faithful. Yeah. What an incredible God that we serve. Well, before you're seated, will you take a minute also welcome everybody in online, all of our first-time guests. Come on, put your hands together. Welcome to Palms Church. You may be seated. Well, I'm excited, man. Excited about this week. Excited about what we got coming up. A couple of things you probably heard about. Our Dream Team party is next week. Where are all my Dream Teamers at? Hey, hey. We have a lot of Dream Team. Dream Team is basically all of you volunteers, all those people that are saying, hey, this is my home and I want to be a part. And so we have a party next week. We have something we're giving away that I promise you want. If you say, well, I'm not on the Dream Team. Well, what better time than now? Easter is coming, but quite frankly, we have such a great team culture here at Palms because we believe and we're excited about what we can do with each other and for each other and just excited about what God's doing. Also, don't forget next week our service times are shifting from 8:30 and 10 to 9 and 10:30. It's because a lot of times one of our two services, sometimes both are in overflow, even with outside. Sometimes we have weeks where people are sitting in rows outside. And so we're just trying to shift some service times to get some people shifted. You don't have to move a service, but if you want to, we'll now push the first one up a little bit to 9 so that you have that. And we're excited, man. Are y'all excited about what God's doing? You excited to be a part? Are you excited to watch God do what only he can do in your life? I don't believe you. I don't believe you at all. That was awful. I'm just being honest. That was pitiful. If I asked my boys something and they gave me a response like that, I'd say, boy, you better think again. That is a bad response. Well, I don't know about y'all, but I'm exhausted. Anybody else? Is anybody exhausted? I'm tired physically. I'm physically exhausted. And when I'm physically exhausted, a lot of times, well, Every time I become emotionally exhausted. And when I'm emotionally exhausted, I always get spiritually exhausted. Anybody understand where I'm coming from? I'll be honest, I didn't want to come today. I don't want to come to church. Your pastor did not want to come to church. Say, man, this dude is, yeah, I was tired. I didn't feel like getting up. My boys are playing baseball, and so we have 2 nights out of the entire week that we don't have baseball. Now, the thing is, we still have all the same responsibilities. We still have 4 kids, which that's enough. And now we've added that, so there's 2 nights, and I'm coaching one, I'm assisting on another, and I'm just tired. And at the end of the day, I can't add another hour because I have things, I have priorities. I'm just exhausted. But this is the thing that's changed for me over the years. I told Casey last night, I said, I'm tired, I don't even want to go. And she looks at me, and I said, but I just need to be with God and his people. I need that. And I'll tell you why, because my flesh doesn't tell my spirit what we're doing. My spirit tells my flesh what we're doing. And so I know physically, your boy's tired. I don't want to be here. I want to be sleeping. I want to be lounged up. I mean, I wake up early every day. I have this weird, sick clock within me that God has given me that I can't sleep in no matter what I try. And so I'm 100 miles an hour from the time I get up. But when I'm tired, I just don't want to do anything. But my physical doesn't tell my spirit what I'm doing. And so I'm here. In fact, I can't wait to be in God's presence even more. That's why this Wednesday, we have our first Wednesday. If you're not a part of that, come to First Wednesday. Come on, we're going to take communion together. We have a prayer service. It's something you don't want to miss. So excited about this Wednesday. Also, next Friday at 12 o'clock, we have our Good Friday service. It's going to be an online-only service, but we'll be broadcasting live from here at 12. So tell your boss, hey, we'll give you a note. Tell them you got an hour that we need to do some, we'll give you a doctor's palms note. You can tell them they can broadcast it to your office. We're not mad. They can let everybody come be a part of it. But I'm excited about what God's doing. But what I know is as I've gotten more mature in my relationship with God is that when I'm tired, there's times I don't want to be in church. There's times I don't want to do things. But the reality is my physical doesn't tell my spirit what I'm doing. And so I know what my spirit needs. It needs to be with you. It needs to be in the presence of God. It needs to be in worship. It needs to hear the word. It needs to have something to digest. And quite frankly, I don't let what I feel determine how I serve God. I don't let those things play a part. And so that's why I'm here. And that's why I came to preach today. And you say, well, that's your job. Well, I got a lot of vacation time. This, you guys are really good to me. I can pretty much take it if I need it. They say, hey, if you're tired, go. But what I'm trying to tell you is that a lot of times I think we're all tired and we can get the best out of us. You know, God can still get something even better than you've ever imagined. He can take you to a place that you've never before seen. You ever feel like you're on this spiritual carousel? You just keep, when you're tired, you just keep kind of do this. And you're like, when am I going to come back around? I just feel like I'm at this place. I can't get out of this place. And then I get really tired. I get emotionally exhausted. I get spiritually exhausted. And I'm just kind of in this constant cycle. I'm in this circle that no matter what I do, I can't seem to get out of this funk. Are there any people that just seem to sit in funks sometimes? Y'all are very, very unself-aware. I'm just being honest. Trying to be as honest as I can, but y'all are not very self-aware this morning. Mark chapter 8, we're talking about the stories of Jesus as Mark records them, and he's writing to the Romans. He's not writing to Jews, and so there's some stories that are written in here, and they're written a little bit different because Mark's trying to hit an audience. It's not Jewish. They're people who don't think that Jesus came for them. And he's writing these stories being very descriptive. And the stories we just read, Jesus fed 5,000, and to take you a quick flyover, he fed 5,000 men alone, not including women and children. Then he went north to Tyre because these Pharisees were all up on him about everything. They were always in his face. He said, I'm just going north. Go north for a little bit. Because he was just like you and me. He gets tired. And he went north, and there was a woman who came to him and said, my daughter's demon-possessed. And he says, because of your faith, she's healed. Jesus didn't even have to go to her house. This lady was healed. Jesus is still in the Gentile territory. He spits on a man's tongue. The man can hear. The man can talk. Then Jesus is still in Gentile territory, and he feeds 4,000. This is a different feeding than the 5,000. But now he's on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, and the Jewish people are there. And here comes the Pharisees once again. They're hiding out, waiting for Jesus. And so this is an interaction that Jesus has with the Pharisees after all that we've just read over the last couple of weeks. In Mark chapter 8, verse 11, this is what it says. It says, when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him. I'm telling you, the best picture you can give the Pharisees is like they're hiding behind trees. And they're just waiting for Jesus to get back into the territory where they can attack him. And so once they see him, they go after him. And it says, testing him, they demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. And when he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit, and he said, why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign. This is actually, this kind of ended his ministry in Galilee. This was kind of the last piece of it. But the Pharisees came out of this hiding place. How many summer lovers do I have in here? Anybody love summer? Come on, man. We're in Virginia Beach. Yay! Hey, that's John. Y'all don't know John. John is the most active human in this building. Y'all have no idea. You have no idea. I'm telling you, you couldn't run with him for a day. I don't care who you are. This man will have you kite surfing, regular surfing, pulling teeth out of sharks. I mean, you don't want none of that. He's in our community, though. If you want to know what John does, go to our community page, right? And you can jump in his groups. You may not ever jump out of it, but you'll jump in his group. I love summer. I don't know about y'all. There's something about I like the heat, okay? I hate spring. Everybody says, well, spring, everything comes alive. No, and then it dies because stuff freezes. The spring is the most bipolar season of the year. It doesn't know what it is. In Virginia Beach, you have 80 degrees for 3 days, and then you get 2 days where it's 27, right? I hate the spring. I've never liked the spring because you don't know whether to wear. You wear a coat in the morning, and by 10:30, you're out in your cutoff. You know, it's ridiculous. But I love the summer. I don't mind the heat. I love the summer heat. I love the pools. I love the water parks. Are there any beach lovers in here? Come on, we're at the beach. You know, I like the bonfires at night on the beach or at your house. I love grilling out. I don't care. You can give me a cheap little hot dog. You give me anything out in the summer and I'll eat it, right? I don't care. I'm not that picky. Why? Because I just like summertime. You know, it's just nice. No, it's not a shameless plug for Will Smith. Come on, people. It's in a political statement. I'm just trying to tell you, what I'm trying to help you understand is that I love summertime, and that song will be on the playlist because I was born in the 80s and I grew up in the 90s. Yeah, I like the summer. I love the summer, and I love it when you go to somebody's house and they got all the food and everybody's bringing a little whatever you want to bring, and you just kick your feet up, play some cornhole, go swimming, whatever you want to do. But I'll tell you one thing, there is nothing better than when you go to somebody's house and they got the spread out and they got the backyard, and you're like, man, it's beautiful, the grass is so green, and you're in your shorts and your tank top, or for my wife doesn't let me wear tank tops, so you're short and your t-shirt. Not for a good reason. She just don't think I look good in them, so I don't wear them. I feel attacked right now. That's hurtful. Hurtful. So you go out in the backyard, you have your tank top on, I'll have my long sleeve on, and we have our shorts on, and we sit down in beautiful green grass, and we're sitting there hanging out. Maybe you're playing cornhole, and all of a sudden you're like, what in the? Mosquitoes. Now, all y'all know in Virginia Beach, mosquitoes are like the bald eagle. They're everywhere, and they're big, right? These things will carry you away. You got to watch your kids. You got to weigh them down. You see them, oh, there goes Asher, third time this week. Mosquitoes got him. We lived in the ocean front, and those things, they're the size of hawks. They'll bite you. There's like the Navy SEAL mosquitoes. You get home, and you're like, I don't remember getting bit, and you rub your arm, there's a golf ball on it, right? Like, what happened tonight? And you start looking, you got them all over your legs. Mosquitoes. How many of y'all just love mosquitoes? How many, you're lying, man. You don't raise your hand for that kind of. How many of y'all? I got another question. How many of y'all don't get bit by mosquitoes? Okay, so all y'all who do not get bit by mosquitoes, we actually do have a member of our team. It's in the back. We're gonna need to draw a tiny bit of your blood because we're working on an experiment for the rest of us. I hate them little suckers, man. I hate them. I hate them with all. And they only get me from the knee down. My ankles look like I have been attacked, but the rest of my body ain't good enough. But they love my ankles. But I'll tell you, I hate mosquitoes. Here's the one thing you need to remember today. There are people in your life that will be mosquitoes, and they ain't going away, and they bite, and it itches long after they leave, and they just annoy you. People in your life are going to be annoying. There will be people in your life, you just want to tell them how it is, where to go, and how fast to get there. Straight up. In fact, the first couple years of pastoring, somebody wants to hear this story. The first couple years of pastoring, I really kept my mouth shut. And what I mean by that is that I had a timidity that I was scared to really, it was a cowardness more than it was a self-control. Where there would be things that I know that somebody needed to hear, but I wouldn't say them, even though they were a little bit of a mosquito, because I wanted to just be Jesus. But what I read, the more I read Jesus, the more I realized he kind of smacked mosquitoes and didn't deal with them so lightly, but he told them what they needed to hear so they could help them. Now, I say that word lightly. You don't want to go around hitting people. My point is, I don't know why we keep coming back to this today. My point is, that's not what I meant. It had nothing to do with it. Satan is attacking me, as you see. There are people in your life you got to deal with. And this is what Jesus was walking into. These Pharisees just would not get out of his face. And he wasn't doing anything to them. He loved them just like he loves us, but these people would not leave him alone. And so in Proverbs, I'm going to read you a quick proverb. King Solomon wrote this. King Solomon, the wisest, richest king of all. They say he was the first trillionaire, the only trillionaire. In fact, David was his father, and David won all the battles. So when King Solomon takes over the kingdom, he was a great king, and he took care of some of the problems his dad wouldn't. But in Proverbs chapter 26, King Solomon writes a proverb that when you read it, feels like it doesn't make any sense, but when you understand it, you realize it's such a depth of knowledge. And this is what it says on how to deal with those people. In Proverbs 26, 4 and 5, do not answer the foolish arguments of fools, or you'll become foolish as they are. But be sure to answer the foolish arguments of fools, or they will become wise in their own estimation. Now, anybody feel like maybe he had gotten into the wine early that night when you read this? I do. Fool actually means stupid. That's what it means. And so when you're thinking of those people right now in your life, be careful because they may be thinking of you, especially if they're in the room. Answer means to give evidence, to correct. So saying, here's the evidence to this. So there's discernment between the two. One is saying, don't answer the fools according to their foolishness. So if you know people's hearts are hard and they don't really care what you have to say, you don't have to answer their foolishness and get in some kind of religious argument because you're not benefiting yourself and you're not pushing the gospel forward by arguing fools about foolishness. Does this make sense to you? But the second part is talking about a little bit of a different scenario. When there are people who need to be confronted, you can do it with the love of God, and it could have the potential to turn them to God. Doesn't mean you're Jesus' principles running around the world telling everybody what they're doing wrong. That's not what the scripture means. What it means is that when there needs to be confrontation, let's not be evasive, but let's speak to somebody because we love them with courage. Hey, this isn't right, and this is what needs to be taken care of. The first part says, hey, don't, just stay out of the foolish arguments. When you all get in these arguments about, did Jesus do this or this, or hey, let's talk about the sovereignty of God and the Trinity, and don't get in those arguments. Just don't, because their people are loaded when they come into those, and they're waiting for bait. All right, just don't do it. It doesn't benefit you. Well, they need to know the truth or they're going to go to hell. Fair enough. Just don't get into the argument. The truth will set you free, but you got to let the chains be broken, all right? Don't get in the arguments. But what the Bible is saying is you got people in your life and hey, they just need a hard word. It doesn't mean it's controlling. It can just simply say, hey, this isn't right the way you're treating people. Or hey, what you're doing isn't okay. We have a responsibility as Christians, as humans, to honor other humans by helping them see what they can. I have very few people in my life that have loved when I have done that in their life. Now, people have done that to me, and I equivocally have had to humble myself and say, okay, but what Jesus did here was different. He did the first. He knew these people weren't going to hear him, and so he just gets back in the boat. I'm going to avoid a foolish argument because there's no reason. And so the Bible says that Jesus turned it around in a different way. In Mark chapter 8, verse 13, it says, so he got back in the boat, and he left them, and then he crossed to the other side of the lake. And this is the word that I want you to hear for a minute, is some of you just need to get back in the boat. You're overwhelmed and you're stressed because you're fighting, you're with fools, and you're arguing about things that aren't worth it, and you're struggling with things that you're not meant to be struggling with. Just get back in the boat and move on. Let it go. Why is it so important that you're right or that they hear you? Just get back in the boat. Well, that's my kid. Again, get back in the boat. Because when you're in the boat and they can't get to you is when they're thinking, well, you don't care no more? No, I'm not getting in the fight. And Jesus knew what it was taking out of him, and he knew that it wasn't progressing the gospel. But the disciples said, let me ask you this. No, without a raising hand, how many of you have gotten into fights you just constantly wonder how you got in that position? And why do I keep putting myself back in this position? Anybody there with family or arguments, you're like, why do I keep putting myself back in this God-forsaken wash cycle that I can't seem to get out of? I just keep getting back in this cycle. And Jesus, so he went back and he says, I'm just going to go back in the boat. The disciples, it says, but the disciples, so we're on to a different story within the boat. They're out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is with his disciples. You might even do this at work. When somebody's getting you a foolish argument, just look at him, hey. What's wrong with you? Nothing. I see you. Do what you got to do. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They only had one loaf of bread with them in the boat. And as they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. Now, the reason that Mark mentions Herod and not Sadducees is because the Romans wouldn't have really had a lot of understanding of what a Sadducee was. They weren't Jewish, but they knew Herod. And so Mark mentions Herod so that they knew this guy, beware of how dark he can be. Beware of the darkness that he's trying to put in your life. And in fact, throughout the New Testament, the word yeast was used as sin. So it was showing you that if you have a little bit of yeast, it's not a matter of, I've watched people over the course of 10 or 15 or 20 years just go like this, slowly, till they're like 20 years, you don't even recognize them. Because that little bit of bitterness, a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of over concern, it just eats at them. And over the course of 15, 20 years, they're not even the same person anymore. Because that yeast just works its way through the person's spirit. And it says, at this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. You gotta love the disciples. Well, how many bread? Jesus just fed thousands of people over there. Why can't he do it on the boat if he needs to? He could do it. Oh, there's a fish, boys, right under my foot. Who would have thought? Like, he can do it again, but they're arguing about bread. And it says Jesus knew what they were saying, and so he said, why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you know or understand even yet? And are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, but you can't see. You have ears, but you can't hear. Don't you remember anything at all? There's so much evidence, but yet the smallest thing can change our perspective on who God really is, isn't it? See, the disciples, there was a gradual increase of unbelief, and that was the yeast, and it'll work its way. That gradual bit of decrease in your belief, it's yeast. Have you ever wondered, maybe you've been in ministry and you're out of it, or maybe this is a new thing for you in Christianity, or maybe you've been a Christian, you've kind of fallen to the place where you're just kind of hardened. You ever wondered how you got there? You ever wonder why the complacency is in your life that you never used to have before, or why there's a hard-heartedness and why you just can't get it fully? Yeah, anybody ever wondered that? Don't show me your hands. It's because of yeast. It's because there's something in your heart. You've come completely off the ledge. And what it does is darkness is trying to pull you away from any power that can change it. Anything in your life that isn't Jesus isn't going to work. Anything. That's why people get hard. That's why I've watched so many people come out of ministry. I can't tell you the amount of people. And they're just hard. It's not that they're bad people. There's a yeast. There's something in their heart that's just hardened, and it's just infected and grown to where there's just an apathetic feeling towards the things of God. It's not because they're bad people. It's because there's been a yeast that's worked its way through the batch of dough. I've watched people that have had hurt in their life and trauma and pain, and then before you know it, they just don't, church isn't a priority. They don't really care that much anymore, and you're thinking, what happened? Well, they just got a reality check? No. They let darkness tell them something, and they just believed it just long enough to where it started to multiply. See, the disciples were with Jesus, but they failed to see everything that the Pharisees failed to see. They still couldn't see the same things. The disciples were dangerously close to unbelief. They didn't realize how close they were. Remembering actually takes us somewhere. I'm not talking about just memories. We all have memories. Everybody has memories they wish not to know. In fact, if you have memories you wish not to know and you're always overwhelmed, discouraged, depressed, it's probably because you're remembering the things that you wish you could forget instead of remembering the things that God's actually done in your life. Anybody have memories that you love, like when you think about a certain time as a child or things you used to do, go pick strawberries and jump in your pool or whatever it may be? Anybody have something, when you think about it, like, man, that was a good memory. Maybe it's a vacation. Maybe it's a time as a kid. Maybe you're bitter every time you think of a specific thing. We're going to stay away from those for right now. I'm asking you the same question that Jesus asked his disciples is, don't you remember? Don't you remember what God's actually done? Don't you remember his faithfulness? A couple years ago, my grandfather passed away and he had dementia. And so towards the end of his life, he was starting to forget certain things and certain people, but he always remembered me, and he always remembered my family, and he would ask questions. And so sometimes the memory was elusive, but this one particular time, actually the last time I ever saw him, I was sitting at the kitchen table with him, and he was an avid fisherman, and he was good. I had a boat back in the day, and I lived in Richmond. We'd go on the James River, and I'd catch 3 fish, and he'd have 15, and I'm looking at him, he's just smiling, just reeling in, and I'm over there trying to get my, hook undone from under the water and trying to figure out why I've lost 13 lures and he's on his first one and his bait hadn't even gotten eaten. Like he was another level. And so I'm talking to him and I'm asking him about fishing and he's starting to go in depth and he knew we lived in Virginia Beach. And so he starts telling me about the beach and about the fish. And he's like, well, I haven't done a lot of saltwater, but this is some lures we can use. He's like, I really want to get down there and fish. And I knew What he didn't probably know in that moment was that as he was getting older, that he was having this flashback with this memory that was extremely detailed about fishing and how we could fish down here and where he'd want to fish and the type of fish we could catch and how excited he was to come down here and fish with me. And he went on for 20 minutes in detail about a fishing trip that he wanted to take in Virginia Beach and about he was going to have me there and about we were going to catch these fish and about the way we could do it and the tactics and all these different things. And my grandmother was staying there with him, and she looks at me, and he immediately just kind of popped back into a different mode. And she looks at me, she goes, I haven't heard him talk that much in 2 years. He had 20 minutes where his memory was right, and he went into such detail with me about fishing and about what it would look like here in Virginia Beach, and I soaked every second of that up. His memory brought a picture back to him where it took us somewhere. There was a moment I felt transported as he was describing everything and what we would experience. You ever have memories where you just felt like you were transported somewhere? Like when you quit daydreaming, you actually pop out of the memory and you forget that you're actually sitting somewhere different? It's like it brings you somewhere. That's why what you think, the Bible talks over and over and over about renewing your minds and about the power of the things that go through your thoughts and about how you have to think on these things that are pure and lovely and pleasant, because God knows that when you remember and you remember the things that he's done, that it'll do things for you that nothing else can. So Jesus isn't asking a rhetorical question. He's asking the disciples, don't you remember? I mean, come on, guys. You were there when the 5,000 people got fed. 5,000 men alone. You remember that hill? It looked like an amphitheater. They were all fed, and then we had leftovers. And you don't remember when we went up and that woman came to me and her daughter was demon-possessed? And she was pleading with me to heal her daughter, and I didn't have to leave the house. And I told the woman, your daughter is healed, and then the woman went back and her daughter was healed. Do you not remember the man who couldn't hear and he couldn't talk, and I spit on his tongue and he began to talk? Do you not remember that? And by me spitting on his tongue, I was showing him I'm the firstborn, I'm the righteous one, I am the Messiah. Even in their Jewish practices, I was showing that I'm the number one. Do you not remember that we just left 4,000 men alone that were being fed? It was another amphitheater. Do you not remember that? Why do you guys not understand what I'm trying to tell you? It's because being in a miracle is different than believing for a miracle. It wasn't personal to them. And Jesus is asking them, don't you remember? And I'm asking you today, don't you remember what God's done in your life? Don't you remember his faithfulness? And Jesus tries to blog their memory. He tries to give it a kickstart, and he starts to paint a very detailed picture of what he's done. And he said, when I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up afterwards? So what he's doing is he's taking his memory and he's pulling all of us in, right? He's saying, I have this memory. Do you remember it? And he takes them and he's pulling them in, saying, this is the picture. Do you remember? Right, Mom and Dad, this is why it's so important for us to have stories to tell our kids. To say, you know why we have this? Do you know why we're here? Let me tell you about when me and Mom had nothing. And we were fasting and praying and believing God for a miracle. And let me tell you what he did. And we're remembering in detail. Because when you remember abuse or assault in your life, you can go back to that very moment in which you were assaulted and you can feel those same emotions. The difference is when you're healed, you don't feel like you're a victim. You realize that God's been faithful. You can talk about your story and your life. You can talk about your family and your wife and how that one of you was unfaithful. And you can go back to that very moment when your wife or your husband confessed to you and you had to deal with that pain. You can go back to that very moment, but you'll either have bitterness and anger or you'll have joy knowing that God's been faithful to your marriage. You see, everything that we remember has something attached to it. And it's not that the memories ever fade and that you no longer feel the emotion. It's that you can feel the emotion and still be healthy. That's whenever you know the healing has taken place. Not that when you feel the emotion, you're triggered and you want to go back there and take somebody's head off with a nice, it's a very violent message, I guess, but with a nice headlock. You see, there's a difference, and Jesus is saying, don't you remember? And they said 12, and then in verse 20 he says, and when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? Well, 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? He asked them. See, remembering is a big part of our spiritual experience. It was a big part of Israel's experience before Jesus ever came and these people were wandering in the desert for 40 years. It was a remembering that God was faithful. You don't need to remember God. When those Israelites, the second generation after the first one died because they were unfaithful, and they crossed the Jordan River, you don't need to remember God when you're camped on the other side of the river. You need to remember God when you're crossing it 100 feet wide during flood stage with your whole family. That's when you remember. Imagine how many little kids, Mom and Dad, can you imagine all the little kids that went across that? You're not thinking about whether you can swim. When that river opens up, you're thinking about whether or not your baby will survive if it were to close. Is that fair? It's not as much faith, mom and dad, for you sometimes as it is for your kids. When you're thinking, well, if this thing closes, do I trust God with my child? I trust him with my life because the worst case scenario, I'm like Michael Phelps up in this Jordan River. I'll do the breaststroke all the way out of here. But do you trust him with your kids whenever you have 3 or 4 and they're all in your arms and they can't swim? You trust him then? But the problem is remembering isn't needed whenever you're on the other side camped out. Remembering is when you're in the middle of the river and it's dry and nothing makes sense, but you know God is in the middle of a miracle. You don't need to remember whenever when you march around Jericho and all the walls fall and you're shouting victory and the supernatural has just happened. That's not when you need to remember. You need to remember when you're marching around the wall on day 6 and day 7 is when it's going down and you're on day 6 and you're not sure that God's going to do it and you're hoping he does because now all of Jericho's looking at you and now you're going to look like a bunch of morons, but they're going to kill you if you're wrong. Oh, Lord, I hope you're in this one. Oh, dear Jesus. Hey, we'll walk a little faster. Bro, walk a little faster. He's looking at me weird. Just walk a little faster. That's when you need to remember. Why? Because you remember what God did, and you remember how he was faithful. And maybe you say, well, I can't remember because he wasn't that faithful. Then you have a memory problem because you're still here. And the bitterness God wants to work through, the pain God wants to work through, the torment, and what Jesus is telling these disciples is don't you remember how faithful I have been? You can't get where you're going. Why is it so important for us to remember? Because remembering helps us to trust. When you remember God's faithfulness, it'll help you to trust in the things right now in this moment that don't make sense in your life. The things that you're kind of iffy on. This is why remembering is so important, because it'll help you see things right now you can't see on your own. It'll help you understand things right now. Maybe not even fully understand, but at least have a peace enough to get through the moment. Let's take a trip down memory lane together. How many of you have forgotten what it was like when you got out of your mom and dad's house or when you got out of college and you had no idea how you were going to make money? You had no idea who you were going to marry. You had no idea where life was going to take you. How many of you forget how you got to where you're at right now? Let's take a look back at some of you who were in marriages 5 years ago that you didn't know if you were going to make it, and you didn't know how you could ever make it, and the pain of what you were going through was too intense, and now you're still here. Let's talk about some of you who a couple of years ago got a cancer diagnosis, and you thought, I have 3 to 5 years, and I won't make it out of this, and so I'm going to make the best of these 3 to 5 years, but now this is year 9, and you don't have cancer, and you're living your life like you never had it, and it's a part of your story, but it's not a part of the end. How many people in this room right now have walked through a tragedy in the last 2 years, and when that tragedy happened, you had no recollection or understanding or even small step of how in the world you could grieve because you were hurt even past the point of being able to grieve. You didn't even have emotion during the trauma because you were too hurt. I see it all the time. People are so broken, they can't even be broken. And it takes months, if not years, to even feel the pain of what you went through. How many of you are in a position right now where you've forgotten what it's like to when God was in that moment and he took you from that dark place because you see where you're at now, but you forget the pain of that moment. And I'm asking you today, do you remember? Will you take a minute and remember that even the way you're feeling right now, it seems hopeless, it may seem dire, you may not fully understand, but do you remember what he's already done in your life? Do you remember how he's been faithful with your kids? Do you remember how he got you out of the place that you used to live? Maybe you lived in a community or you lived in the projects or you lived in the nice house on the corner, but your life was a complete shambles and you were doing cocaine or smoking weed all the time and could never get your mind right. Do you remember what it was like when you had that pornography addiction and you couldn't get away from the computer and you no longer desired your wife and your kids were falling apart? Do you remember what it was like whenever you begged God for your dream job and then he finally gave it to you and you were undeserving, but now you're the CEO or you're the manager or you're the one in charge and you forget what it was like in the moments where you were humble? Does anybody remember how God's been faithful to you? Or when you prayed for a job and God gave it to you and he brought you away from a place that could have torn you apart to place you in another place where you brought health? Do you remember today? This is what Jesus is asking, and I'm asking you, do you remember? Why do we fail? Why do we fail to remember? It's because we remember what we want, and if we remember that we were the victim, we live in a place where God owes us something. If you're sitting here today, you're not a victim. I was abused sexually as a child multiple times, and I'm standing here in front of you with my shoulders squared up, my chest, my chin held high, saying, I'm not a victim to anybody. Satan is a punk. He doesn't get my space. He doesn't control me. I got 4 boys that are growing to be strong men of God. They're going to walk in an anointing. Why? Because I serve Jehovah Jireh. The King of all kings is my God, and I am redeemed, and I am restored, and Jesus is the great I am, and I remember his faithfulness. I remember how he is. Then, fill in the blank. That's not called remembering. That's called bitterness. We all have a version of the story we want to remember. You have no idea what God's done to keep you from more memories you wish you had never had to have. But you'll never know because he's taking care of them. And see, when we feel like I've done this, bro. God didn't do this. Oh, Jesus, help him. You haven't done nothing. I promise you. As much as you think you have achieved, where do you think you got your giftedness to achieve that? You didn't earn it. There's a lot of things you're good at that you did not build. Say, we look across the world and all these people do great things. You can do great things with the gifts God's given you for yourself. It doesn't mean that you've done it. It means that you've taken what God's given you and selfishly just made it about you. That doesn't take a gift. It just takes selfishness, right? I always think of these people that I see that are extremely gifted and they're rich and they're famous. And I'm thinking, man, if they did that for God, can you imagine the impact they could have had in their life? But they've settled for a pond when God had an ocean. A pond that nobody even knows the name off of some little country road when he's got an ocean that everybody knows its name. Because God will do things that only God can do when we give him what's his. So I'm asking you again today, don't you remember? Don't you remember what he's done? How'd you get where you're at? Do you remember the things that he's taken away from your life and the way, do you remember that night you cried the only tear in your life and it fell down your cheek and hit your pillow and God saw it and he did something only God can do? Do you remember that? Because he does. And he doesn't use it as bait to say, I did it. He uses it to say, hey, I'll do it again. I'll do it again. Just trust me. King David, the same David who threw a stone at the head of Goliath and killed this giant when it was trying to take out the Israelites. Before he became the king of Israel, he had a long tenure of running away from King Saul, who was the first king of Israel. King Saul found out that David was his successor, and he chased him, trying to kill him. And David was between the Philistines and King Saul, and the Philistine was a territory that was on the other side of Israel, and David runs to the king of Gath, and he acts like he's a madman. He acts like he's insane with drool going all over his beard. And the king looks at him and says, this man is no threat. Get him out of here. He faked that he was going insane so that he wouldn't be killed because he was scared. As soon as that happened, you don't think of King David like that, right? Undefeated warrior. Before he became the king, acted like a madman in the court of a Philistine king. You're telling me that God killed a giant, has kept you alive, called you to be the successor of Israel, and you're acting like a madman because you're scared that God won't do it. Like, David, don't you remember? Right after that incident, David wrote Psalm 34 as a reminder to all of us to keep the faith in the one who created you. And this is what it says in Psalm 34. It says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. Taste, make it a part of your life, and then you will see that he is everything that he says he is. Oh, the joy of those who take refuge, that know that this is my God. I bow down and surrender to him. You have to remember, because our remembering will help us to trust him. How do we do that? You have to choose. You have to choose right now to remember. You can choose to be a victim. You can choose to be confused. You can choose to be bitter. You can choose to remember the things that you blame God for, but yet was darkness, and God kept you from more than you even know and protected you from more you even know. I've had these conversations with God. Oh, God, well, if you love me, then why? Why did I have to experience that? Why did I have to go through that? Why was that a part of my story? And God said something to me one day, I'll never forget. He said, you have no idea what I kept from you. You have no idea the ways that I protected you. And you have no idea that I was always there and that I wept harder than you could ever weep. You have to choose to remember both what you remember and say, hey, today I'm going to remember God's faithfulness. You remember 2020 whenever you looked at the news, and not all of us, many of us never thought I didn't know if I'd ever see you again. I didn't know what was in store. I knew that I didn't think it was the end of the world. I just didn't know what it would look like. I didn't know what that future would look like. I didn't know the next time. And as a pastor, I had such a burning passion in a heart to just be and to see you and to be, hey, it's going to be okay. Look at me. And so what we did, we jumped online. We said, hey, right away, we're going to get online and just try to get as many people to see, like, hey, we're here with you. We're not going anywhere. And we did, and it was great. But what I'm trying to tell you is that was the darkest time that we have ever lived in, probably the darkest time we'll ever live in for our lifetime. But I'm asking you, choose to remember what those fearful days looked like when you weren't sure if you were going to see everybody else again. There was an apocalyptic feel to what we didn't know. We didn't know if we were going to get sick. We didn't know if all of us would get it, which most of us probably have. I mean, I guess, I don't know. We didn't know. And I'm asking you today, choose to remember. Do you remember God's faithfulness in your life? We've mourned and we've wept, but we've also rejoiced together. And we've also sang songs of praise to our God. Do you remember today how faithful God has been to you, even in the last year, the last month, the last day? Do you choose today to remember? And this is what Jesus is saying to his disciples. Will you choose to remember? Come on, guys. Remember what I've been and what I've done, because I want to do it again in your life, but I can't do it until you trust me. Choose to remember. The number one thing keeping you from memory is your hurt. It's your pain. See, victims always say, well, you don't understand because you don't know where I've been. And I do understand because I've been in those places. And I can tell you this. When I was a victim, I'd take care of it myself. Nobody understands. But when I let God in and I trusted him and I became a victor, I took the posture of everybody's got to hear this because it'll change everything. I had somebody ask me this week, hey man, why do you pastor? I get this question all the time. Why do you pastor, man? All the time I get this question. I was like, well, I found something I had to tell everybody about. And I couldn't live the rest of my life without dedicating all that I am to making sure everybody, I love people so much, to making sure that everybody I came in contact with didn't know that there is something that fixes everything and that he's everything that he says he is. I said I found him. I was later on in life, and when I found him, I couldn't help myself. I had to tell everybody, and God was very clear. He said, hey, spend your life doing this. I said, okay, you got me. Because when I found him, there's no looking back. Will you stand with me this morning? I get it. I get it. The hardest thing to press through is our pride. And when I get tired, I get quiet. So a lot of people may think I'm like kind of loud and boisterous. I'm like that sometimes, but when I get tired, I just get quiet. Like people think I'm just rude. I just keep to myself. No matter what I'm doing, I'm always like, how you doing? Good to see you. You know, just kind of do myself. Because I just get to a certain way where I don't think about it. And it's okay when you're tired. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be overwhelmed. Yeah, it's okay to feel like you don't have the answer. What I'm trying to tell you today is that God is just saying, will you trust me? Remember the things I've done in your life, and I promise you that as your trust grows, I'll do it again and again. You like how I did that? Brought it back to last week. I mean, this book of Mark is just one beautiful book. It just keeps colliding with itself. He will do it again. He will heal the brokenness again. He will heal those assault wounds again. He will heal those sexual wounds again. He will heal those drug wounds again. He will heal those addicted wounds again. He will heal those marriage wounds again. He will heal that relationship. You're not headed for another divorce. God's going to heal it. You're not headed for another addiction. God is going to heal it. You're not headed for another place in darkness. God is going to heal it. You're not headed back there. And you want to stand for something, you want to be victorious, then you stand in the face of darkness and you tell it, I'm not going back. I am not going back. You're not leading me anywhere. I'm surrendering to God, and I choose freedom over slavery. I choose freedom over being bound. And that's the decision we're making today. It's saying, I choose to walk under the authority of my God, and I refuse to be chained and led around like a slave going to slaughter, like somebody that's looked at and looked down upon that's not good enough. I'm a child of the Most High. If you've got breath in your lungs and a heart that beats, you were created intimately by the King. You aren't to be bound or held back. You are to be set free in the name of Jesus. And I promise you today, that's what you have right here. But you got to come and get it. You got to come and get it and choose what you remember. Choose how you remember it and say, God, today I choose to trust you and I will surrender to what you have. Will you close your eyes with me this morning? And I want you to ask the Lord right now. I want you to ask him. If you don't know him, I want you to take a moment and know that there is a King that died for you. He is so deeply in love with you. He's never had a disappointing thought about you. Will you just give him a moment? And if you don't know him, would you say, as a family, can we say this prayer together? Say, dear Jesus, I choose you today. I surrender my life. I need you. I choose to remember your faithfulness. I choose to remember that you're a good God. And today, I give you my life. In Jesus' name. I want everybody right now in this room and online, I want you just to think about what you're going to remember. I want you to think right now about the things that you know God is doing in your life, and that today he's asking you, choose to remember. Are you going to remember the tragedy or his faithfulness through it? Are you going to remember the pain or the way that you don't have the pain you used to, or because you don't choose to remember, you're still in that same spot you were 10 years ago? Are you choosing right now the day and the one you choose to serve? Are you saying, God, I give it all to you? For those of you, I want to just take a moment and worship. Will you do that? Would you lift your hands and just say, God, I give it to you. God, we choose to surrender. We know you're doing something great in our life. We know you're up to something. We know you're doing things far above and beyond anything that we could think, ask, or imagine. And today, God, we choose to remember. We choose to remember the God that saved us, the God that's restored us, the God that helps us, the God that is whole and is a healer. And we believe you. We believe you, God. I pray that as you see the hearts of your people right now, we would know that we're being looked down upon by a King that he marvels in us. We love you. Come on, we know he's up to something. We know he's up to something. Come on, just take a minute. Right now, he's doing it in your life. It's you that he's doing it in. Come on, he's doing it in you.
God is doing something
right now.
Right now.
Come on. He's healing someone. It's you. He's making a way for you. He's doing it for you. Right now.
Right now. He is healing someone. He is saving someone. God is doing it
right now. Right
now.
It's your mountain. It's your way. He's making your path.
God is doing something right now. God is doing something right now.
It's your miracle. It's your prayer. It's your healing
for someone. God is doing something right now. He is moving mountains, making a way for someone.
Come on.
God is doing something right now.
All of it is in you, God.
In the name of Jesus.
It's gonna come. He promises. He'll do it again and again and again and again. Come on, celebrate it.
All of my hope is in the name of Jesus. Breakthrough will come. Come in the name of Jesus.
God turn it around. He will do it.
And God turn it around. And God turn it around. And God turn it around.
Come on, I want you to say it. God's gonna do it. Tell him.
God turn it around.
Yeah.
And God turn it around. And God, come on, let's just sing it one more time.
One more time, just tell
turn
him.
it around. And God turn it around. And God turn it around. And God turn it around. Oh Lord, God turn it around. And God turn it around. God turn it around. Yeah, yeah. Come on, He's worthy of our praise. Oh, we know you will, Lord. We know you will, God. Amen, amen. Hey, we love you. God bless, and we hope to see you next week.